The sound of shattering glass silenced the entire ballroom of the Alderfield Hotel. "Do you have any idea how much this dress cost? You clumsy, useless girl." Marin knelt down, her hands trembling as she gathered the broken glass at the woman's feet. "I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore. Someone bumped into me. Please let me help you clean it. You're not fit to stand near what I'm wearing. Get out of my sight. This dress costs more than your entire year's salary. I'm truly sorry. It was an accident. You should be grateful I haven't called security to drag you out. You have every right to be angry. I only ask for your forgiveness. Stay away from me. I don't want to see your face again." Sloane Whitmore turned and walked away, her heels striking the stone floor with each measured step. No one in the room said a word. Only whispers moved between the tables. "That girl is finished. Whitmore will make sure she loses her job. Well, she should have been more careful. People like her never forgive." Marin stayed on her knees, picked up the last shard, then rose and carried her tray onward. She still had 4 hours left on her shift, and tomorrow morning her mother had dialysis. At the corner of the hall, a tall man in a dark tailored suit stood watching her from the shadows. He said nothing. He simply remembered. No one in that room knew that the man silently observing them owned the building they were standing in, the street outside it, and every door in this city that no one dared to knock on, because the way a person treats someone they believe has nothing that is their true portrait. And sometimes, the most looked down upon person in the room is the one holding everything. If Marin and Elias's story touched you, leave a like and share it with someone you believe deserves to be treated with kindness. And don't forget to subscribe, because every week we bring you another story about hearts that never surrender. 25 years earlier, on a winter night in Chicago, young Elias Marchetti sat on the third step of the grand staircase in the sprawling house, his arms wrapped around his knees, waiting for his father to come home for dinner. He was 8 years old. The table had been set since 7 o'clock. By 9, the food had gone completely cold. The servants moved in and out, glancing at him several times before turning away again. "Young master, go upstairs and get some sleep. It's late. I'm waiting for father. He'll be home. Go to sleep first, and when you wake up tomorrow morning, you'll see him." The boy shook his head. The woman stood there a little longer, then bent down and lifted him into her arms. Elias didn't struggle. He only looked back at the great front door below until the hallway hid it from view. That night, he lay in bed with his eyes open, listening to the telephone ring downstairs close to midnight. It rang for a very long time. Then someone picked it up. Then the entire house fell silent. A silence unlike the silence of any other night, the kind an 8-year-old child couldn't name but could still recognize. He heard footsteps running across the courtyard, the roar of a car engine, and the sound of it speeding away. After that, there was nothing. Near dawn, Elias woke to the sound of a door opening. He ran to the top of the stairs and looked down. His mother stood in the middle of the foyer, her hair plastered to her forehead, her clothes still soaked through with rain, one hand clutching her purse as though she'd forgotten she was holding it. She didn't take off her coat. She didn't call for anyone. She merely looked up and saw her son. Rosalind Marchetti climbed the stairs, one step at a time, slowly, leaving dark trails of water across the carpet. When she reached him, she knelt until her eyes were level with the boy's and placed both hands on his shoulders. Her hands were cold. "Where's father?" She didn't answer that question. She looked directly into her son's eyes and said only one thing, her voice steady. "From this night forward, you must never cry in front of anyone. Tears are the only thing another person can take from you without asking permission." Elias didn't fully understand those words when he was 8. But he remembered them. He remembered them for the next 25 years. He remembered the cold of his mother's hands on his shoulders, and he remembered the sound of water dripping from the hem of her coat onto the carpet. And he never cried in front of another person again. 25 years later, in a windowless room beneath an unnamed building on Wacker Drive, Elias Marchetti sat at the head of the table. He was 33 years old. 3 men stood before him and delivered their reports. None of them was permitted to sit until he had finished speaking. The first reported on a shipment being detained at the southern port. The second spoke of a transportation union demanding a larger share. The third remained silent longer than the other 2, before finally admitting that someone within the organization had leaked the schedule to outsiders. Elias didn't interrupt any of them. He listened to every word, his hand resting motionless on the table, his fingers never tapping, his posture never shifting. When the last man finished, The entire room waited. Elias raised his eyes. "Shut down that port. 7 days." He spoke very softly, almost in a whisper, and that was precisely why no one dared ask him to repeat himself. Closing the port for 7 days meant dozens of people would lose their jobs. It meant 3 partners would suffer heavy losses. It meant the man who had leaked the information would panic and expose himself. No one objected. In Elias Marchetti's world, people had learned that the lower his voice became, the more unshakable his decision was. To his right, Curtis Lomax nodded in approval. He was the man who had served Elias's father since the earliest days, and the only person in the room permitted to sit. "The right decision, young master." Elias didn't reply. He merely noticed something very small, so small that even he dismissed it a moment later. When Elias said 7 days, Lomax's gaze lingered on his face 1 second longer than usual. On Sunday morning, Rosalind Marchetti placed a thin folder on the dining table and pushed it toward her son. She was 61 years old, her hair swept into a neat bun, and her hands still carried the old habit of straightening the silverware before any serious conversation. 7 families. I've looked through every one of them. 3 have daughters who studied in Europe and came home. 2 are in real estate, and 1 is in law. Choose one. Elias didn't open the folder. He lifted his coffee cup, took a sip, then pushed the papers aside. "Could you choose for me, Mother?" "Elias, I'm serious. As far as I'm concerned, those 7 names are all exactly the same." Rosalind set down her cup. "You're 33 years old." "I know. I won't live forever to protect this family name for you." "I know that too." She studied her son for a long moment. "Then what do you want?" Elias set down his coffee cup, and for the first time that morning, he looked directly into his mother's eyes. "I want a woman who can look at me without thinking about anything I own. Show me one woman like that among those 7 names, and I'll marry her today." Rosalind fell silent. "They come to me because of the Marchetti name, or because they're afraid of the Marchetti name. I've had dinner with every kind of woman there is, Mother. Some count the rings on my fingers, others tremble when they pour the wine. Not one has ever asked whether I was tired that day." "So what are you planning to do? Marry someone who doesn't know who you are?" "No. I'm going to let someone know who I am before she knows what I have," he continued, his voice as calm as if he were discussing a shipment. 3 months. I'll work the night shift at the Alderfield Hotel as a front desk clerk. My name will be Eli Marsh. No one at the hotel will know who I am, including the board of directors. You'll keep everything else exactly as it is." At the far end of the table, Booker Hayes rose to his feet. He was 41 years old and had spent 15 years standing behind this family. In all those 15 years, he had interrupted Elias only 3 times. This was the 4th. "You can't do that, sir." Elias didn't turn around. "Go on. The night shift has the fewest people. The front desk is in the middle of the lobby, with 3 entrances and nowhere for anyone to stand guard without being seen. You'll be standing there for 8 hours every night, in the same place at the same time. Anyone who wants to find you will know exactly where to look. And that's without mentioning what happened at the southern port last week." "I know. Then I'm begging you, sir." Elias turned and looked at Booker. "Booker, no one has dared come near me in 33 years. It isn't because I'm heavily guarded. It's because they're afraid. Do you honestly think anyone would be foolish enough to look for me in the last place on earth they'd ever expect me to be?" Booker pressed his lips together. He didn't agree, but he couldn't find an answer. That was how Elias usually ended an argument, not by speaking louder, but by speaking last. Rosalind was the one who finally broke the silence. She gathered the papers on the table, lightly tapped their edges against the wood until they were perfectly aligned, then placed them in a drawer. "I agree. Thank you, Mother. But there's one thing I need to tell you first." She stood, and before leaving the dining room, she stopped behind her son's chair. "That hotel bears my name. I built it from nothing with my own 2 hands after that rainy night. Every year, I stand on that stage at the employee recognition ceremony. I shake every person's hand, and I tell myself I know who they are. But when you go down there and put on that uniform, you're going to see things you won't want to see, Elias. People treat one another very differently when they believe the person standing before them has nothing in his hands." Elias remained completely still, his eyes calm and his posture unyielding. "That's exactly what I'm going there to see, Mother." 3 days later, a 33-year-old man walked into the Human Resources office at the Alderfield Hotel, signed his name to a probationary employment contract, and walked out with a uniform and an employee badge bearing the name Eli Marsh. The night shift began at 10 o'clock. Elias arrived 20 minutes early, wearing a properly fitted charcoal gray uniform, with his employee badge fastened over the left side of his chest, and waited in the staff area like a man reporting for his first day of work. The shift manager was a middle-aged man with a slightly bulging belly, who spoke quickly and never looked anyone in the face for more than 2 seconds. "Marsh, right? Good. There are only 3 rules here. First, no sitting. Second, don't ask a guest to repeat themselves more than twice. Third, whatever anyone tells you to do, you do it. Don't ask why. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Go bring in all the luggage belonging to the group that just got off the bus at the east entrance. When you're done, wipe down the front desk. There's been a water stain on it since this afternoon, and no one's touched it." Elias nodded and went. He carried 14 pieces of luggage from the east entrance to the baggage storage area, walking back and forth 7 times. One suitcase was so heavy that the guest traveling with it felt compelled to tell him it was filled with books. Afterward, Elias took a cloth and wiped down the front desk from one end to the other, then wiped it a second time, because the water had dried into a stain. While he was bent over cleaning, 2 employees walked past him, and neither one said hello. That was the first thing he learned that night. It wasn't because they hated him. It was because, in their eyes, the man wiping the desk wasn't a person. He was merely a task being completed. A little after 11 o'clock, a car stopped outside the main entrance. Sloane Whitmore walked in with a phone pressed to her ear, followed by a driver carrying 2 large bags. She strode straight through the lobby, still talking as she snapped her fingers toward the desk. "Take this luggage up to room 402. Be careful with the bag on the right. There are fragile things inside." She said it without breaking stride, without turning around, and without looking at his face, even once. Elias straightened, answered yes, then stepped forward and took the 2 bags from the driver. He carried them to the 4th floor, set them down exactly where they belonged, and turned the bag containing the fragile items toward the wall. When he returned to the ground floor, Sloane was still standing in the lobby, still speaking on the phone, and still had no idea what the man who had just gone up to her room looked like. That was the second thing he learned. A person could give him orders without ever needing to know that he existed. Close to 1 o'clock in the morning, a server walked past the desk, stopped, and looked him over from head to toe. "You knew?" "Yes. First night." The other man nodded, then lowered his voice. "Listen to me. Do whatever you have to do around here, but don't get mixed up with Miss Whitmore. She never forgets anything." With that, the man walked away without waiting for Elias to ask another question, and without giving his name. Elias remained alone behind the desk with those words. By 2 o'clock in the morning, the lobby had fallen almost completely empty. He was still standing. At 4 o'clock, his legs began to go numb from his heels to his calves, and he realized that in the past 3 years, he hadn't stood continuously for more than 40 minutes anywhere. In the windowless room on Wacker Drive, he sat at the head of the table while other people stood. Here, it was the other way around. Here, he was the one standing, and people passed in front of him as though they were passing a pillar. At 5 o'clock, a drunken guest stumbled in and dropped his room key on the desk 3 times in a row. Elias picked it up and handed it back all 3 times. The guest never said thank you. At 6 o'clock, the sky began to brighten. The shift manager came to hand things over to the morning staff, glanced at the front desk, nodded once, and told Elias he could go home. Elias took off the uniform in the employee locker room, hung it up, and stood there for a while. During the past 8 hours, no one had raised their voice at him. No one had insulted him. Nothing that could truly be called terrible had happened. Yet he had just seen something that 3 years of sitting at the head of the table had never allowed him to see. When people believed he had nothing in his hands, they didn't need to be cruel to him. They simply didn't see him. And that was what wore a person down, one night at a time. On his way to the rear exit, he passed the kitchen of the Corvina restaurant, where the night shift had also just ended. A young woman was sitting on the steps, taking off her shoes and rubbing both feet. Then she slipped the shoes back on, rose, and kept walking. Elias remembered that face. He had seen her in the banquet hall the evening before, when she knelt to pick up each shard of glass beneath Sloane Whitmore's feet. Elias's 4th night behind the front desk passed exactly like the 3 nights before it. He carried luggage, handed out keys, wiped down the counter, and stood. By 2 o'clock in the morning, the lobby had emptied completely. leaving only the steady hum of the air conditioner and the yellow light spilling across the stone floor. He'd been on his feet without a break since 10 o'clock that night, hadn't eaten anything since lunch, and realized that he was leaning one hip lightly against the edge of the counter, a habit he hadn't had just a few days earlier. Footsteps came from the hallway leading out of the Corvina restaurant. Maren Doyle had just finished her shift, her hair tied back in haste, a worn cloth bag hanging from one hand. She passed the front desk on her way to the rear exit. And then she stopped. She didn't stop because she needed anything. She simply stopped and looked at him. "You're the new guy, aren't you?" "Yes. 4th night." "I thought so." New people always stand with their backs very straight. After saying that, she placed the cloth bag on the counter, opened it, and took out an untouched employee meal, still sealed inside its container, with the lid fastened tightly. She pushed it toward him. "Night shifts are long. Eat before you keep standing." Elias looked at the container on the counter. Then he looked at her. "Is this yours?" "It's my shift meal. I picked it up at 10, but the restaurant was so busy that I didn't get a chance to eat." "Then take it home and eat it." "I won't get home until 4 in the morning. Food doesn't taste good at that hour anyway. And you still have 4 hours left before your shift ends." He stood motionless. In 33 years, many things had been placed before Elias Marchetti. People had sent him wine, watches, envelopes, even invitations he never accepted, but no one had ever pushed a container of cold food toward him and told him to eat so he wouldn't be hungry. "I'm not accustomed to taking things from strangers. I'm not accustomed to giving them, either. But you've been standing here since 10 o'clock. I've passed this desk 4 times, and I haven't seen you leave this spot once." She said it calmly, without reproach, and without any sense that she was doing him a favor. Elias studied her for another moment. "Why are you doing this?" Maren slipped the strap of her bag back over her shoulder. She thought for a second, not because she was searching for an impressive answer, but as though she were deciding whether to tell him the truth. "Because I've worked night shifts when no one asked whether I'd eaten." Then she added, her voice softening, "That lasts much longer than hunger." Elias couldn't find a single word in reply. He was a man who could sit in silence while 3 people delivered their reports for 20 minutes, then bring everything to an end with 6 words. But now he stood behind a hotel counter and couldn't find even one. "What's your name?" "Eli. Eli Marsh." "Maren. From the restaurant." She gave him a small nod, then turned away. After walking a few steps, she glanced back. "Make sure you eat before it gets completely cold. The rice here gets very hard once it cools." Then she truly left. Elias listened as her footsteps faded toward the rear exit, heard the heavy door close, and then the lobby fell silent again. He remained exactly where he was, staring in the direction she'd gone for far longer than necessary. The meal was still sitting on the counter. He reached out, pulled it closer, and opened the lid. Inside was white rice, a little chicken, 2 slices of steamed carrot, and a small portion of vegetables that had wilted slightly from sitting too long. There was nothing remarkable about it. It was the standard employee meal, the very thing his mother's company approved a budget for every year, something he'd once seen in an expense report as nothing more than a line of numbers. He ate, standing behind the counter at 2 o'clock in the morning, wearing a charcoal gray uniform and a badge bearing a name that wasn't his own. And as he ate, he thought about something. That young woman had just given him the only meal she'd had during an 8-hour shift. She'd given it to a man she was meeting for the first time, without asking who he was and without needing to know whether he could ever give her anything in return. She'd handed it over and walked away, never lingering for a word of thanks. In the world where Elias had grown up, everything anyone gave was an investment. If someone offered him anything, they'd already calculated the day they intended to take it back, and he'd grown so accustomed to that truth that it no longer seemed unusual. He closed the lid, placed the container neatly in the trash beneath the counter, then straightened his back once more. During the remaining 4 hours of that night shift, Elias Marchetti didn't think about the southern port. He didn't think about the person who'd leaked the schedule, nor did he think about the 7 names in the folder his mother had placed in the drawer. He thought only of one very simple question no one had ever asked him. Had he eaten yet? The next morning, Elias didn't go home as soon as his shift ended. He stayed in a corner of the lobby with a cup of coffee, telling the shift manager that he was waiting for a ride. At 7:15, an elderly guest came out of the elevator carrying a paper bag filled with medicine. Halfway down the corridor, the bottom of the bag tore open, Several pill bottles fell onto the stone floor. One of them popped open, and white tablets scattered everywhere, rolling toward the legs of the chairs and beneath the lobby tables. The elderly woman stood frozen for a moment, then slowly braced her hands on her knees and tried to bend down. Just then, Sloane Whitmore entered through the main doors, holding a paper cup of coffee, the heels of her shoes striking the floor in a steady rhythm. She walked straight into the middle of the scattered pills, paused for half a second when several of them blocked her path, frowned slightly, then stepped around them and continued on. She didn't look down. She didn't stop. She merely leaned aside to avoid the elderly woman stooping in the middle of the corridor, as though she were avoiding a chair someone had placed in the wrong spot, then walked straight toward the executive elevator. The old woman remained bent over, her trembling hands searching across the stone floor. Marin came out from the direction of the restaurant. She'd just finished her shift, and her cloth bag was already slung over her shoulder. When she saw what had happened, she placed her bag on a chair and immediately knelt on the floor. "Please, just stay where you are and let me pick these up for you. If you keep bending like that, you'll get dizzy. Leave them to me. I can do it. Just sit down in this chair for me. I'll have them picked up in no time." Marin gathered the pills one by one. She even crawled beneath a lobby table to retrieve 2 that had rolled deep underneath it, then wiped each pill clean with a tissue before returning it to the bottle. When she was finished, she sat beside the elderly woman and picked up the 3 medicine bottles to examine them. "When are you supposed to take these? I can't remember anymore. My daughter told me, but I've forgotten. The blue one is for the morning, or maybe the evening. Wait here for just a moment." Marin stood, went to the front desk, and asked for a small sheet of paper and a pen. She returned, read the label on each bottle, then divided the paper into 3 pieces and wrote on each one in large, clear letters: morning after eating, noon after eating, evening before bed. She attached 1 note to each bottle, then placed all 3 inside her own cloth bag and handed it to the elderly woman. "The paper bag is torn. Take this one instead. I have another. But what about your bag? It's all right. Take it so nothing falls out again. I'll walk you up to your room." She helped the old woman to her feet, supporting her elbow with one hand while pressing the elevator button with the other, then accompanied her upstairs. There were 7 or 8 people moving through the corridor at the time. Not one of them stopped. Elias was still sitting in the corner of the lobby with his coffee, which had long since gone cold. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, in the large conference room on the 12th floor, Rosalind Marchetti stood at the head of the table before the entire board of directors and every department head. Elias stood at the very back in his charcoal gray uniform, alongside 3 other employees assigned to serve water during the meeting. No one in the room looked in their direction. "Before we begin the reports, there's something I'd like to say." Rosalind opened the folder in front of her. This quarter, the Customer Relations Department received more letters of praise than it has in the past 3 years. I've read every one of them. One guest wrote that he returned to the Alderfield for the 4th time, not because of the rooms, but because people here treated him with kindness. She raised her eyes. "Miss Whitmore, please stand." Sloane rose to her feet. "Your job is to care for our guests, but anyone can provide service. Genuine devotion is something else entirely. I appreciate the devotion you've shown to the guests of this hotel. Thank you." The room broke into applause. Sloane bowed her head, her hands folded modestly in front of her, her voice just loud enough to be heard. "Thank you. I've only been doing my job. If anything good has come from it, the credit belongs to the entire team." The applause grew a little louder. Someone nodded softly in approval. Rosalind closed the folder, satisfied. At the back of the room, the employee wearing a name badge that read Eli Marsh stood motionless, still holding the tray of water, his eyes fixed on the woman bowing humbly amid the applause. That morning, the same woman had stepped around an elderly guest, crouching on the floor to gather her medicine, and hadn't looked down even once. The woman who had knelt on the stone floor was now sleeping in some rented room, preparing to wake and work another night shift, and no one in this room would ever speak her name. At 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning, Marin arrived at the hospital just as she always did after her mother's dialysis session. Colleen Doyle lay on her side in the bed, 56 years old, and much thinner than she had been the previous summer. She coughed for a long time, trying to keep the sound low, then turned to look at her daughter. "You stayed up all night again, didn't you?" "I got 3 hours of sleep, Mom." 3 hours. She coughed again. "I can tell just by looking at your face." Marin poured some water and helped her mother sit up to drink half a glass. Colleen held on to her daughter's hand. Her own hand was cold and thin. "I've made life so hard for both of you. Mom, please don't say that again. But it's the truth. You're 27 years old. Your friends have homes and families of their own by now, while you work 2 shifts a day to support this worn-out old body. And then there's Bridget. Bridget is doing very well in school." The door opened. Bridget walked in, 19 years old, her hair tied high, carrying a container of porridge. She set it on the table and spoke at once, her voice deliberately casual. "Marin, I got a daytime dishwashing shift. It's at the restaurant near school, from 9 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. They want me to start next week." Marin spun around. "What did you say?" "I said I got a job. What about school? I'm only taking 1 more semester off." "Bridget." Marin set down the glass. "You have to go back to school. Do you hear me? You have to go back." Bridget didn't look away from her sister. She stood there, still holding the lid of the porridge container in both hands, and spoke very quietly. "You've been saying that for 3 years." The room fell silent. Colleen turned her face toward the wall. Marin opened her mouth to continue, but no words came, because her younger sister was right, and all 3 of them in that room knew she was right. Bridget set down the lid, her voice softening. "Never mind. Eat some porridge. And could you send a message to Eli, the front desk clerk at your hotel, for me? He kept my wallet safe the other day. I want to ask which shift he's working so I can stop by and thank him." "All right. I'll message him." At 11 o'clock, an employee from the hospital's financial office arrived carrying a stack of documents. He spoke briefly and directly, and he had probably delivered these words so many times in his life that his voice no longer held any emotion. "Miss Doyle, I need to speak with you about the cost of the transplant. There are currently 4 patients on the hospital's waiting list who are compatible with the donor. We're holding your mother's place based on the date of her registration, but hospital policy requires the financial paperwork to be completed before the surgery. How much time do we have?" 3 weeks. If the amount hasn't been paid in full by then, we'll have no choice but to give the opportunity to the next person on the list. I'm very sorry, but we can't hold it any longer." He pushed the agreement across the table. Marin picked up the pen. She read it from beginning to end without skipping a single line, then signed her name. Her handwriting was neat, and her hand didn't tremble once. "Would you like a copy?" "Yes, please." She took the copy, folded it in half, slipped it into her cloth bag, said goodbye to her mother and sister, then left the room. After walking about 10 steps down the corridor, Marin stopped. She leaned her back against the wall, both hands still gripping the strap of her bag, and stood perfectly still. Someone walked past her. She didn't move. About a minute later, she pushed herself away from the wall, adjusted the bag on her shoulder, and continued toward the elevator. She still had an afternoon shift at the coffee shop at 1 o'clock, and a night shift at Corvina at 10. At 3 o'clock that morning, Elias passed through the restaurant's bar area after carrying a piece of luggage down to storage. Most of the bar lights had already been turned off. Marin was asleep on a bar stool, one hand still resting on the counter, her head lowered onto her arm, sleeping so deeply that she didn't hear his footsteps. He stopped for a few seconds, then he tapped lightly on the wooden counter twice. "Marin." She jolted awake too quickly. Her elbow struck the cloth bag beside her, sending it to the floor and spilling everything inside. A thin wallet, a set of keys, and a stack of documents. Elias bent down to pick them up. He retrieved the wallet first, then the keys, then the papers. The documents had fallen open, and on the top page, beneath the words "total estimated cost," was a number. He looked at that number for more than a second. Marin snatched the papers from his hand so quickly that the corner of the top sheet folded over. She gathered them, shoved them back into her bag, then looked up and smiled. "It's all right. I'll find a way." "Marin, I only fell asleep. We had so many customers tonight." She slung the bag over her shoulder, smoothed back her hair, and stood straight as though nothing had happened. "Thank you for waking me. If I slept here until morning, the manager would dock my pay again." Then she left through the rear door. Elias remained alone in the darkened bar. Only one number remained in his mind, along with something he had just realized. The young woman who had given him her only meal a few nights earlier owed an amount that even a lifetime of working 2 shifts a day could never repay. At 4 o'clock in the morning, Elias dialed Booker Hayes' number. The first ring hadn't even finished before someone answered, because in the 15 years Booker had worked for this family, he had never allowed the phone to ring through a second time. "Sir." Find me everything about someone. Marin Doyle, night shift server at the Corvina restaurant in the Alderfield Hotel. There was half a second of silence on the other end. By everything, do you mean everything, sir? Everything. Yes, sir. At 9 o'clock the following morning, Booker entered the office on the 40th floor and placed a single sheet of paper on the desk. Just one sheet. Elias picked it up and read, Marin Doyle, 27 years old, born and raised on the southwest side of Chicago. Her father died when she was 12. She graduated from high school, enrolled in community college for 1 year, then dropped out. She had worked as a server ever since and had never changed professions. She currently held 2 jobs, an afternoon shift at a coffee shop on Halsted Street and a night shift at the Corvina restaurant. She rented a 2-bedroom apartment with her 19-year-old younger sister, who was taking time away from college. Her mother, Colleen Doyle, 56 years old, had end-stage kidney failure, underwent dialysis 3 times a week, and was awaiting a transplant. No bad debt, no criminal record, no files anywhere, no man in her life for the past 3 years. Elias finished reading the page, then read it again from top to bottom. Is this all? Yes, sir. I had people check 3 different sources. All 3 came back the same. There's nothing else? Booker hesitated. There is one thing, but it isn't in any record. Someone at the restaurant said she hasn't missed a single shift in 2 years, not even when her mother was hospitalized. She finishes work before going to the hospital, or leaves the hospital and goes straight to work. Elias placed the paper on the desk. In the 33 years he had sat in this position, he had read hundreds of files Booker brought him. Every one of them had been thick, filled with hidden loans, hidden relationships, and names appearing in places where they had no business appearing. Everyone had a dark corner, and his job was to know where that corner was, so that, when necessary, he could place his hand on exactly the right spot. But this page was clean. So clean that it was only 1 page long, and that entire page said just one thing. This woman had nothing except 2 jobs and a mother who was dying a little more with each passing week. Booker was still standing there. He didn't leave as he usually did. Sir? Say it. What are you planning to do? Elias didn't answer. He continued looking at the paper on the desk. I'm asking because I have to. Booker continued more slowly. You've had me investigate many people, but never a server who has nothing to do with us. If you're only curious, I'll destroy this page right now. But if this is more than curiosity... He stopped. Then from this moment on, her name is in my hands. And when something is in my hands, one day it may end up in someone else's. Elias looked up at Booker. He said nothing. He merely folded the paper in half and placed it inside the drawer on the right. The drawer Booker knew was reserved for things Elias didn't want anyone touching. Booker watched the drawer close. Then he bowed his head and left, shutting the door very softly behind him. As he walked down the corridor, he thought of something he had never once needed to consider in 15 years. Throughout all those years, the man sitting in that room had never had a single weakness. That night, Elias stepped onto the balcony of the 40th floor. The city stretched beneath him, glowing from the edge of the lake to the distant suburbs, and somewhere among those lights was a 2-bedroom apartment where a woman was sleeping for 3 hours before beginning her afternoon shift. He stood there for a very long time, one hand resting on the railing. He had spent 33 years among people who wanted what he had. She was the first person who had given him something she didn't have to spare. After that night, Marin began stopping at the front desk every time her shift ended. She never stayed long. Sometimes they exchanged only 3 or 4 sentences, and sometimes she stayed just long enough to set down a glass of water before leaving. But every night, she stopped. On the 9th night, a drunken guest stumbled in at nearly 3 o'clock in the morning, leaned his full weight against the counter, and demanded coffee. Elias made him a cup. The man took 1 sip, grimaced, and pushed it back. Marin was walking past when she saw what happened, and turned around. You made it too strong. He asked for coffee. If a drunk man drinks strong coffee, he'll be sitting right here in the middle of this lobby before long, telling you his life story until morning. Do you want to hear it? No. Then do this. She pulled the cup toward her, poured out half the coffee, added hot water and 2 spoonfuls of sugar, then placed it on a saucer beside a full glass of water. Give him the water first and the coffee afterward. Tell him you're making the coffee hot again. Once they finish the water, most people start feeling sleepy on their own and go back to their rooms. Where did you learn that? 7 years of waiting tables teaches you a great many things, Mr. Marsh. 15 minutes later, the drunken guest went upstairs to his room. Elias watched him leave, then turned to her. You were right. I know. On the 12th night, she told him about a guest staying on the 6th floor. He's been here for 4 months. Every night at 10 o'clock, he calls the restaurant and orders 2 identical meals, one for himself and one to be placed on the chair across from him. Does anyone sit there? No one. When he finishes eating, he calls and has both meals cleared away. Have you ever asked him about it? No. If people don't tell you, you shouldn't ask. But last week, when I brought the food up, he said something to me. What did he say? He said, "Thank you. My wife always loved this dish." Elias was silent for a long while. What did you do? I said, "Yes, sir. I'll make sure her portion is warmer tomorrow." On the 15th night, at 2 o'clock in the morning, the lobby was completely deserted. Marin set her bag on the counter, rested her chin in her hand, and gazed out through the glass doors. Mr. Marsh. Yes? You've been working here for half a month now. What do you think? My feet hurt. You'll get used to it. By the 2nd month, they'll stop hurting. By the 3rd, you'll be able to sleep standing up. Can you really sleep standing up? Of course. Once, I stood beside the coffee machine with my eyes open while my mind went to sleep for 30 seconds. When I woke up, my hand was still holding the milk pitcher. Elias shook his head slightly. Marin. Yes? May I ask you something? Go ahead. What do you dream of? Marin turned and looked at him. The question seemed to surprise her a little. Not because it was difficult, but perhaps because no one had asked her that in a very long time. She truly considered it, seriously, for several seconds. Sleeping for 8 hours straight. Elias thought she was joking. Are you serious? Of course I am. 8 hours, no alarm clock, no one calling me, no waking up in the middle of it to check the time. I worked it out. The last time I slept like that was the summer I was 20. I thought you'd say something greater than that. What would be the point? It's exhausting to dream about things you can't reach. Then she smiled. Besides, you should try it. 8 uninterrupted hours without anyone calling you. I'd wager even you would find that luxurious. And Elias laughed. It wasn't the faint curl of his lips he used during meetings, nor was it the polite nod he gave the people seated beside him at dinner. He laughed aloud, only briefly, but it was real. He heard the sound of his own laughter and startled himself a little. He was 33 years old, and he couldn't remember the last year in which he'd laughed that way. Marin looked at him, then began laughing too. So you do know how to laugh. I thought you didn't. So did I. You're a very strange man. She slung her bag over her shoulder. When people start a new job, they usually talk too much, but you stand here all night without saying a word. Still, you listen more carefully than anyone I've ever met. She headed toward the rear door. After a few steps, she glanced back as she always did. Are you working this shift again tomorrow? Yes. Then I'll see you tomorrow. Elias remained alone behind the counter, and during the remaining 4 hours of that night shift, he thought about something he'd never had reason to consider before. Somewhere in this city was a woman whose dream was to sleep for 8 uninterrupted hours, and though he could buy the entire building in which she stood, there was no way he could buy that sleep for her. Sloane Whitmore first took notice of the night shift front desk clerk on a Thursday evening, and she noticed him because of something very small. She was crossing the lobby when she stopped at the desk to ask about a group of guests arriving the following day, and as she listened to his answer, she realized that he didn't lower his eyes. After 3 years at the Alderfield, she had grown accustomed to employees looking down at the counter whenever they spoke to her. This man didn't. He looked straight at her, answered in 3 concise sentences, and there wasn't the slightest hint in his voice that he was trying to please anyone. Have you worked here long? Almost a month, Miss Whitmore. What did you do before this? Other work. She waited for him to continue. He didn't. Sloane walked away from the desk with an uneasy feeling she couldn't name. Over the days that followed, she began to watch him, the way he stood, his shoulders open, never leaning against anything, never putting his hands in his pockets, the way he handed guests their keys without bowing more than necessary, the way he waited until others had completely finished speaking before he answered, never interrupting and never wasting a single word. Hotel employees didn't stand that way. Hotel employees learned to make themselves smaller. This man didn't make himself smaller at all. He was simply quiet. and Sloane knew very well the difference between those two things. On Wednesday night, the following week, she approached the desk at 11 o'clock. "Mr. Marsh." "Yes, Miss Whitmore. I have tomorrow evening free. I know a rather good place in the Gold Coast. Would you join me?" she asked in the voice of someone who had never needed to prepare herself for the possibility of being told no. Elias didn't look down, and his expression didn't change. "Thank you, I won't." That was all. No explanation. No apology attached. No lowering of his head to soften the refusal. He finished speaking and turned back to the screen in front of him as though he had just answered a question about checkout time. Sloane remained there for 2 more seconds. In the 32 years she had been alive, she had been rejected a few times, but never by a man wearing an employee's uniform, and never like this. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't afraid. He simply didn't care, and that indifference was something Sloane couldn't bear. "Very well." She spoke, then walked away, the heels of her shoes striking the stone floor in the same steady rhythm as always. The next morning, Sloane went down to Human Resources. "Let me see the personnel file for the night shift front desk clerk. Eli Marsh." "Is something wrong?" "Nothing at all. I'm reviewing the staff list for the quarterly report." The file was brought out. Sloane opened it and read very slowly. A probationary employment contract, a personal information form, an address listed on the north side, a complete social security number. The reference was a private transportation company that had ceased operating the previous year. Everything was there, everything was in its proper place, and everything was valid. And it was precisely because everything was in its proper place that Sloane sensed something was wrong. The records of real service employees were never this clean. There would always be a box filled out incorrectly, a missing document, an old telephone number that hadn't been updated. This file, however, was as neat as a set of documents prepared by someone who knew exactly what he was preparing. She photographed 2 pages with her phone, then returned the file to its place. That afternoon, Sloane called an acquaintance at a background screening company. 3 days later, he called her back. "Miss Whitmore, I was able to verify everything you gave me under this name, but there's something strange." "What is it?" "Before last year, there's nothing at all. No credit cards, no rental agreements, no utility bills, not a single record. This name only began to exist about 14 months ago." "What does that mean?" "It means either he lived completely outside the system for 30 years, or someone created this identity for him. And if it's the second possibility, I'd advise you not to dig any deeper. The kind of person who can build a set of documents this clean isn't an ordinary person." Sloane ended the call. She sat motionless in her office for a very long time, looking out over the lobby below, where, at 10 o'clock that evening, a man would once again stand behind the front desk for 8 hours without leaning against anything. Then she opened her contacts and scrolled down to a name she hadn't called in 3 years, not since the day his letter of recommendation had carried her through the doors of the Alderfield. The phone rang twice. "Miss Whitmore, it's been a long time. Mr. Lomax." Her voice was light and composed, as though she were discussing the weather. "There's something I'd like you to look into for me. There's a man at my hotel whom I don't believe is an employee." The other end of the line fell silent for a moment. "Go on." And Sloane did. She told no one else. She didn't report it to the board, didn't give the file to Human Resources, and didn't ask another question at the hotel. Throughout the following month, every time she passed the front desk, she continued to nod and greet the man in the charcoal gray uniform as though nothing had changed. And that was what made it truly frightening. On the 4th night of that week, the rain began falling at midnight, and by 4 o'clock in the morning, it still hadn't let up. Marin finished her shift, stood at the rear door looking outside for a while, then opened her bag and counted the loose change in her wallet. She counted it twice. Then she put the wallet away, pulled up her collar, and stepped outside to walk home. Elias saw her pass the glass doors. He told the man taking over the desk that he was leaving 10 minutes early, went out to the employee parking lot, got into the old car he had been driving to work for the past month, and pulled onto the main road. He caught up with her at the 2nd Street corner. She was walking close to the curb, her hair plastered to her forehead, one arm clutching the cloth bag against her chest to keep it from getting any wetter. He lowered the window. "Marin." She turned around. "Get in. You don't have to. I'm used to walking. It's 5 kilometers from here to the southwest side. I'll be there in 40 minutes. 40 minutes in this weather." She was about to say something else, but stopped. She stood there for a second, rain streaming down her face, then opened the car door and climbed inside. The car was much warmer than the street. Marin held the cloth bag on her lap, rested both hands on top of it, and stared straight ahead. Elias drove slowly. After about 3 blocks, he realized that she hadn't said a word, and until then, she had never sat beside him without speaking. Was the restaurant busy tonight? No. It was quiet. He glanced at her. Her shoulders were trembling, and it wasn't from the cold. Marin, I'm fine. You've said that many times before. She fell silent. Then she lowered her head, tightened both hands around the straps of her bag, and began to cry. She didn't cry loudly. She tried to hold it back, tried to keep the sobs from escaping, and that only made the sound more painful to hear. Elias pulled over and turned off the engine. He didn't ask another question. He simply sat there. A long time passed before she could speak. I went to the hospital to see my mother tonight before work. What happened? She held my hand. Marin drew in a breath. She told me she'd had enough. She said, "Please don't keep treating me, sweetheart. You girls still have your whole lives ahead of you, but I don't. Don't keep pouring everything you have into this body." Marin wiped her face with one hand. My mother is 56 years old. She said it so calmly, as though she'd made up her mind a long time ago, and had only been waiting until today to tell me. What did you say? I told her to get some sleep, that I'd come back early tomorrow. Then I left and went to work. She continued, her voice breaking. I've worked 2 shifts a day for the past 2 years. I haven't dared miss a single one. Some days, I stand in that restaurant until my legs go so numb that I have to hold on to the edge of a table. But I've never felt as tired as I did when my mother held my hand and asked me to stop trying to save her. Do you understand? She begged me, as though being alive had become a burden she needed my permission to set down. Elias opened the glove compartment, took out a handkerchief, and offered it to her. She accepted it and pressed it to her face. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. It's all right. It was already kind of you to drive me home, and now I'm sitting here crying in your car. Marin. She looked up. Your mother didn't say that because she wants to give up. Elias spoke very softly, in the same voice that, in another room, in another city, would have been enough to keep 3 men from daring to ask another question. She said it because she can see that her daughter is wearing herself down. People only ask to die when they believe staying alive is slowly killing someone they love. Marin looked at him for a very long time. Outside, the rain continued drumming against the roof of the car in waves. How do you know these things? I lost my father when I was 8. He said nothing more. She didn't ask. She wiped her face, folded the handkerchief, and placed it on her lap. Her body was still trembling in her wet clothes. Elias took off his coat and held it out to her. Put this on. No, it's all right. You're soaked. Don't be too kind to me. This time, she looked straight into his eyes. I can't afford to pay you back. At this point in my life, I owe something for everything. I can't take on another debt. Elias kept the coat extended toward her. I don't lend. She heard those 3 words and fell silent. Then she reached out, took the coat, and draped it over her shoulders. She placed her hand on the back of his, just once, very lightly, like a thank you she couldn't bring herself to say aloud. Then she withdrew her hand and sat up straight again. Please take me home. It's 4:30, and I have to be up at 6. Elias started the car. Neither of them spoke for the rest of the drive. When she got out in front of her apartment building, she started to remove his coat and give it back. Keep it. You can return it another day. And she did keep it. For many weeks afterward. On Friday night, on the south side of the city, 2 men sat across from each other in an otherwise empty warehouse. Arturo Falco was 50 years old, leaning back in his chair with both hands resting on his stomach. Curtis Lomax was 47, sitting upright, with a thin, unopened file in front of him. What do you want? Falco asked. I want Marchetti's chair. Then you've come to the wrong place. That chair isn't for sale. No, but it can be left empty. Lomax pushed the file across the table. Falco didn't touch it. What's in there? The schedule for the next 6 months. Dates, times, container numbers, names of the recipients at the other end. All 3 routes. The North Port, the overland route through Indiana, and the route you've spent 4 years trying to find. Falco still didn't touch the file. He looked at Lomax. How many years have you been with the Marchetti family? 26 years. I stood beside the boy's father before he was even born. Then explain something to me. Why is a man who gave them 26 years sitting here tonight? Lomax smiled faintly. Because after 26 years, I still only get to sit on the right. I never get the seat at the head of the table. Because every time that boy makes a decision, he doesn't ask me a single question. He speaks, and the entire room follows, including me. Last week, he shut down the Southport for 7 days. 7 days. Do you know how many men lost everything because of those 7 days? Including you. Including me. Falco nodded slowly. Do you know what your problem is, Lomax? It isn't that you want the chair. Everyone wants it. Your problem is that you're trying to sell me something I don't believe is real. The documents are right in front of you. I'm not talking about the documents. I'm talking about what comes afterward. You're telling me Marchetti can be removed. Falco leaned forward slightly. I've been in this city for 40 years. I've watched that family through 3 generations. But I've never been able to read that boy. Not once. He doesn't drink in public. He never takes the same route twice. He has no wife, no children, no mistress, not even a favorite restaurant. Marchetti never leaves himself exposed. Lomax didn't answer immediately. He poured himself half a glass of water, took a sip, and then spoke. That used to be true. Until when? Until this month. Falco was silent. Do you know where the boy has been every night for the past month? Tell me. Standing behind the front desk at the Alderfield Hotel, wearing a gray uniform, an employee badge pinned to his chest, from 10 o'clock at night until 6 o'clock in the morning, the same place, the same hours, 30 nights in a row. This time, Falco reached out and pulled the file toward him. He still didn't open it, but he placed one hand on top of it. Why is he doing it? At first, I didn't understand either. I thought he was conducting an internal review, but my people have followed him for 10 days now. Lomax shrugged. He's standing behind that front desk because of a waitress. Falco stared at him. Say that again? A young woman who works the night shift at the hotel restaurant, 27 years old. Nobody. With nothing to her name, and a mother waiting for a kidney transplant. Every night after her shift, she stops at the desk and talks to him for a few minutes. It rained last week, and the boy left his post 10 minutes early, drove out to the main road, and took that girl all the way home. The warehouse remained silent for a very long time. In 26 years, I've never seen him leave his position even 1 minute early for anything. You want to know where Marchetti is vulnerable? There. Falco slowly leaned back in his chair. He tapped one finger against the file 3 times, each tap measured and unhurried. Give me her name. I will, but not yet. Why? Because I don't want you acting now. If you touch that girl at this point, the boy will burn the whole city down looking for you, and I'll still be standing at his right hand. I don't want to be sitting inside that fire. Lomax folded his hands together. For now, your job is to use that schedule. Cut off a few shipments. Make him come back. Make him choose between the chair and the front desk. People only fall when they're forced to choose. And after that? After that, when he's exhausted, when people inside his own house have begun to suspect one another, I'll give you the name. Lomax rose and fastened the button of his jacket. Until then, leave the girl alone. Let her keep working 2 shifts a day. Let the boy slowly grow accustomed to having someone he can lose. Falco rose as well. The 2 men shook hands. Mr. Lomax. What? 26 years. Falco's voice was calm. If you can sell the man who kept you beside him for 26 years, you can sell me in 26 days. Lomax smiled without answering, then walked toward the door. On the table, the file remained exactly where it was, still unopened, but from that night forward, it no longer belonged to the Marchetti family. At 11:40 on Tuesday night, the phone in Elias's jacket pocket vibrated. He looked at the screen, saw Booker's name, and knew at once that something was wrong, because Booker never called during his night shift. Elias stepped into the area behind the desk before answering. Talk. The shipment at the North Port, sir. It was intercepted. How? They knew the time. They even knew the number. The truck had been out of the yard for 3 minutes when 2 vehicles blocked it from the front. Our men? Booker was silent for half a second. 2 of them had to go to the hospital. Nothing life-threatening, but the cargo is gone. Who knew the schedule for that shipment? 7 people. Call all 7 of them in. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Elias ended the call. He returned to the desk, told the man working beside him only that a family matter had come up and he had to leave immediately, set his employee badge on the counter, and walked toward the door. The other man called after him, asking whether he had cleared it with the manager, but Elias was already gone. At 4:15 in the morning, a black car stopped outside the east entrance of the Alderfield Hotel. The man in the front passenger seat got out first, walked around the hood, and opened the rear door. Another man stepped out of the car behind them and stood one pace back, his hands held in front of his stomach, his eyes sweeping the sidewalk. Elias emerged from the car. He was no longer wearing the charcoal gray uniform. He paused on the sidewalk for a few seconds and said something brief to the man who had opened the door. The man nodded, and both cars pulled away. Across the street, beneath the shelter of the bus stop, Maren was waiting for the 4:20 bus. She had been standing there since her shift ended, and she saw everything. She saw the way the two men stood, the way they stepped back when Elias got out, the way neither of them dared turn his back on him. She saw Elias speak one sentence, and both cars leave at once. The bus rolled up. She boarded, took a seat beside the window, and for the entire ride home, she couldn't think of anything else. The following night, Maren finished her shift at 2 o'clock. She went straight to the front desk, set down her bag, and came directly to the point. "I saw you last night." Elias looked up. 4 o'clock in the morning, at the east entrance. There were 2 black cars. "Someone opened the door for you." His expression didn't change. Hundreds of times in his life, he had sat across from people who wanted to know who he was, and not once had his heart beaten faster than usual. This time, it did. "I also work as a driver." "A driver?" "For a private company. I drive clients. The night shift here doesn't pay enough, so I take extra work with them. Sometimes they call without warning, and I have to leave in the middle of my shift." "What about those 2 men?" "Co-workers. They brought me back because I'd left my car in a lot on the other side of the city." Maren looked at him. She said nothing for several seconds, and in those few seconds, Elias knew perfectly well that the story he had just told contained at least 3 things that didn't fit. Hired drivers didn't have doors opened for them. Hired drivers didn't speak a single sentence and make 2 cars leave at once. And hired drivers didn't stand the way he had stood on that sidewalk the night before. She was intelligent enough to see every one of those things. He waited for her to ask another question. She didn't. Maren gave a single nod. "All right, I believe you." Then she slung her bag over her shoulder and continued in her usual voice, as though what had just passed between them was a small matter that had already been settled. "Make sure you get some sleep. You've looked terrible for the past 2 days." She walked out through the rear door. Elias remained behind the desk, and for many years afterward, he would still remember how he felt at that moment. He had endured informal interrogations that lasted 4 hours. He had sat across from men who placed their hands on the table and questioned him one sentence at a time, searching for a crack in his account. He had been doubted, tested, and scrutinized by the best men in the business, and not once had any of it made him uncomfortable. Yet those 3 words made him want to follow her all the way to the door. She didn't believe him because she was foolish. She had seen everything. She had simply chosen not to ask more, because in her world, when someone didn't want to tell you something, you didn't ask, just as she had never asked the guest on the 6th floor why he ordered 2 identical meals every night. She gave Elias the right to keep one place entirely his own, and she gave it as quietly as she had pushed that lunchbox across the counter on the first night. Elias stood there for a very long time. Those 3 words should have brought him relief, because he had escaped, but he felt no relief at all. He had only just realized that, for the first time in his life, someone had placed her trust in him without asking for anything in return, and he had used that trust to lie to her in his very first sentence. The following Monday morning, money went missing from the Alderfield Hotel. A guest on the 14th floor reported that the cash he had placed in the hotel safe on Saturday night was gone, $200,000. Within an hour, the board sealed off the safe deposit area, canceled all scheduled time off, and summoned every employee who had worked over the weekend to the 2nd floor conference room. By 7 o'clock that morning, nearly 30 people were packed into the room. The head of security stated briefly that, according to the access log, the key card to the safe deposit room had been swiped at 2:13 on Sunday morning, and that, in accordance with procedure, every employee's personal locker would be searched immediately, with everyone present. No one objected. The entire group went down to the employee locker area in the basement. They began with locker number 1. Locker number 1, nothing. Locker number 2, nothing. By the time they reached locker number 9, a few people had begun whispering among themselves. By locker number 12, the tension had faded, and several people were checking their watches. Maren stood in the second row, still wearing her restaurant uniform because her night shift had ended only an hour earlier, and she hadn't had time to go home. She wasn't worried at all. She was calculating in her head that if this ended soon enough, she could make it home and sleep for 2 hours before returning for her afternoon shift. The security officer cut the seal on locker number 14. He opened the metal door. Inside was a neatly folded man's coat, a pair of soft-soled shoes, and a worn cloth bag. And at the bottom of the locker, placed neatly beside each other, were a bundle of cash still wrapped in its bank strap and a gray key card. The entire basement fell silent. The security officer picked up the card, turned it over, read the number on the back, then compared it with the paper in his hand. He nodded to the man beside him. "It's the right card." Someone behind them drew in a sharp breath. Then every head turned. All 30 people in the basement turned in the same direction, and there in the second row stood Maren Doyle, still holding the key to her own locker. She didn't understand what was happening. For the first 3 seconds, she truly didn't understand. She even glanced around to see whether they had opened the wrong locker. Then she saw her cloth bag inside, and the man's coat folded neatly in the upper corner, the coat someone had given her in a car on a rainy night. "Miss Doyle." "Yes." "Is this your locker?" "Yes." The security officer stepped toward her. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone asked loudly whether the police had been called, while someone else said they should wait for the board. But the security officer kept coming. He pulled both of Maren's hands behind her back, and the metallic click of the cuffs closing sounded painfully clear in the silent basement. Maren didn't struggle. She didn't cry out. She didn't fall to her knees, beg anyone, or look around for help. She merely lifted her head, looked straight at the man holding her arms, and spoke one sentence in a clear, steady voice. "I didn't take it." Then she fell silent. Sloane Whitmore stood on the stairs leading down to the basement, her arms folded across her chest. She descended 3 steps, walked up to Maren, and looked at her with the sorrowful expression of someone who had just been forced to witness something deeply regrettable. "I tried to defend you." She spoke softly, just loud enough for the people around them to hear. "When they brought up the list this morning, I was the one who said they shouldn't search the employees' lockers. I told them no one here would do such a thing. Miss Doyle, I truly did defend you." Maren didn't answer. The crowd began to disperse. 2 people turned their faces away the moment she looked toward them. A waiter who had worked the same shifts beside her for 2 years lowered his eyes to the floor, and as they led her up the stairs, a quiet voice came from somewhere behind her. She couldn't tell whose it was, but it was loud enough for her to hear. "It's a shame, but her family does need money for the hospital." Maren didn't turn around. She climbed the last step and didn't say another word. At 9 o'clock that morning, on the 40th floor, Booker Hayes lowered the phone onto the desk. "Sir, I've just received word. They found the money in Miss Doyle's locker. She's being held in the hotel security office while the board decides whether to turn her over to the police." Elias said nothing. He stood with his back to Booker, staring through the windows. "Should I send someone down there now, sir? One call from Mrs. Marchetti, and they'll release her within 10 minutes. "No." Booker froze. "Sir, listen to me." Elias turned around, and his voice remained as quiet as ever. "If I pull her out now, whoever arranged this will know who I am and disappear within 24 hours. People will only say she was released because someone powerful was protecting her, and Maren Doyle will carry the name of a woman who stole $200,000 for the rest of her life." He took 1 step closer to the desk. "I don't need her released. I need her name cleared. And to do that, I have to let them follow this all the way to the end." Booker lowered his head. "Yes, sir. There's one more thing." Elias looked directly into his eyes. "From this moment on, no one touches her. No one asks her a single question unless one of my people is in the room. No one takes her out of that building." He added 2 final words, and Booker understood that this was all the time the full machinery of the Marchetti family had to work. 8 hours. The hotel's holding room was at the end of a basement corridor, a small room with a table, 2 chairs, and a narrow window set high in the wall. Maren had been sitting there since 8 o'clock that morning. By noon, they had removed her handcuffs. By afternoon, no one came in anymore. The head of security entered twice, asked her the same question over and over, then left. Someone from Human Resources came in once, placed a suspension notice on the table, told her to sign it, and left as well. By 6 o'clock that evening, the corridor outside had fallen completely silent. No one called for her. Not one of the 30 people who had stood in the basement that morning came back. She sat alone in that room for 10 hours, both hands resting on the table, her back straight, and she didn't cry once. At 9 o'clock that night, the door opened. Elias walked in, pulled out the chair across from her, and sat down. He wasn't wearing his uniform. Maren looked up at him, then lowered her gaze to the tabletop again. Go home. I just got here. If you sit here with me, tomorrow people will start saying you and I are in this together. Let them. She remained silent for a long time. Then she asked in a very quiet voice, Do you think I took it too? No. How can you be so sure? She looked up. Her eyes were red, but dry. The money was in my locker. The key card was in my locker. I'm the only one with the key. All 30 people saw it this morning. You've worked here for 1 month. What do you know about me that makes you so sure? I know enough. What do you know? I know you need more money than the amount they found. He spoke evenly. I know your mother has 3 weeks left. I know your younger sister just dropped out of school for the 3rd time. If you wanted to steal, you would have done it 2 years ago. You wouldn't have waited until there were only 3 weeks left. Maren couldn't answer. There's one more reason. Elias placed both hands on the table. I've spent my entire life among thieves, since I was 8 years old. I've sat at the same table with them, shaken their hands, listened to them talk. Some people steal and laugh. Some steal and cry. Some steal and then give money to charity so they can live with themselves. But every one of them has the same look on their face, and I can recognize that look from the other side of a room. He looked at her. You don't have that face, Maren. And she cried. This time, it wasn't like the time in the car. This time, she didn't try to hold it back. She collapsed over the table, covered her head with both hands, and wept like someone who had carried something heavier than she could bear for far too long. I didn't do anything wrong. Her words came in broken pieces. I work 2 shifts a day. I haven't missed a single shift in 2 years. I've never taken a penny from anyone. The day my mother was rushed to the emergency room, I still worked my entire shift. But this morning, 30 people stood there. 30 people I've worked beside for years. And not one of them could open their mouth and say that girl wouldn't do something like that. Not one. She raised her head, her face wet with tears. They don't need to know whether I took it. They only need to know that my family needs money. That's enough for them. Elias reached across the table and took her hand. Her skin was cold, with calluses at the base of her fingers. Listen to me. His voice was very soft. Listen carefully, because I won't say this a second time. She looked at him. All 30 of them turned their faces away this morning. I didn't. And from now on, even if this entire city turns its back on you, I'll still be here, sitting beside you. You're not alone anymore. He tightened his hand around hers just a little. I can't promise you that everything will be over tomorrow, but I can promise you one thing. The name Maren Doyle will be cleared. Not just on paper. It will be cleared in front of the exact 30 people who stood in that basement this morning. Maren looked at him for a very long time. She didn't ask what right he had to make such a promise. She simply nodded and left her hand resting in his. At 11 o'clock that night, Elias walked out of the holding room. He went to the end of the basement corridor, climbed to the parking garage, and took out his phone. He dialed a number. The first ring hadn't finished before someone answered. The hallway camera outside the safe deposit area on the 14th floor. They reported that the footage from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock on Sunday morning was lost because of a recording system failure and couldn't be recovered. He paused. You have until 6 o'clock in the morning. The person on the other end didn't ask a single question. Elias ended the call. He stood in the dark parking garage for several seconds, then opened his contacts again, scrolled to another name, and made a second call. This one was shorter than the first. He spoke only 3 sentences. The first was a name. The second was the name of a hospital. The third was 2 words. Right now. Then he ended the call, slipped the phone into his pocket, and drove away. At 6:10 the following morning, the Alderfield Hotel's technical department announced that the supposedly lost footage from the 14th floor hallway camera had been recovered. At 7 o'clock, the board reviewed the recording. At 7:20, Marin Doyle was escorted out of the holding room, given a brief apology, and informed that her suspension had been revoked. She walked out of the building just as dawn was breaking, too exhausted to think. And she had no idea that close to midnight the night before, in another part of the city, an unnamed charitable foundation had transferred the entire remaining amount needed for the kidney transplant of a patient named Colleen Doyle. The recovered footage didn't show anyone's face. It showed only a shadowy figure walking down the 14th floor corridor at 2:10 on Sunday morning, stopping outside the safe deposit room and returning 4 minutes later. The person wore a long coat, gloves, and a hat. The board concluded that it clearly wasn't Marin Doyle, because the figure's build didn't match hers, but there still wasn't enough evidence to identify anyone else. The investigation was turned over to the police and stalled there. Sloane Whitmore continued going to work as usual. No one asked her a single question, but 3 days later, she received word from an acquaintance at the background check company, and this time, the information came with a file. She sat in her office, closed the door, and opened it. The first page held a photograph taken from a distance through the glass of a restaurant. A man in a black suit sat at the head of the table, with 3 other men standing behind him. No one else was seated. The second page showed him emerging from a building on Wacker Drive, with 2 men walking ahead to open the door, while another followed 1 pace behind. The third page was a copy of an old Chicago Police Department file bearing the name of a man who had died 25 years earlier, and under the section for next of kin were the names of his wife and his 8-year-old son. The final page contained only a few lines, including one surname repeated 3 times: Marchetti. Sloane read everything, then folded the pages closed. She sat motionless in her office for a very long time. If she took the file to the board, she would gain nothing, because the owner of the hotel was the mother of the man in those photographs. If she gave it to the police, she would die. If she remained silent, she was still the person who had planted $200,000 in a waitress's locker, and sooner or later, someone would trace it back to her. She sat there all afternoon, and by the time darkness fell, she knew what she was going to do. She wouldn't strike at him. She would strike at the one place he had just left exposed. At 7 o'clock on Friday evening, Marin had just stepped out of the cafe on Halsted Street after her afternoon shift when she saw a car parked across the street. Sloane Whitmore was waiting on the sidewalk. "Miss Doyle?" Marin stopped. "I have nothing to say to you." "I know. I didn't come to talk about what happened." Sloane walked closer, holding a large brown envelope in both hands. "You've suffered terribly this past week. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. They found money in your locker. The entire hotel turned its back on you, and you sat in that room for more than 10 hours. What do you want? I only want to ask you one question." Her voice was soft, almost gentle. "During all those hours, who came in and sat with you?" Marin didn't answer. "Miss Doyle, I'm asking sincerely. I'm asking because I'm worried about you." Sloane held out the envelope. "Do you know who the man who poured coffee for you at 2 o'clock in the morning really is?" "Don't talk about him. I'm not saying anything. I'm only giving you this. Open it wherever you want, whenever you want. If you look through it and decide I'm wrong, burn it. I'll never mention it again." She placed the envelope in Marin's hands. "I simply think you deserve to know. Someone has already planted money in your locker once. You shouldn't be the only person in this city who doesn't know who she's standing beside." Then Sloane turned away, climbed into the car, and the vehicle pulled away from the curb. There wasn't a single triumphant word. There wasn't a smile. She said what she had come to say and left, exactly as a decent person would have done, and that was what made the entire thing so frightening. Marin remained on the sidewalk with the envelope in her hands. She meant not to open it. She walked 2 blocks, stopped at the bus stop, sat down on the bench, and opened it. She stared at the first page for a very long time. The man in the black suit sat at the head of the table while 3 others stood behind him, and no one else was allowed to sit. She had seen that posture before. At 4:15 in the morning, beneath the bus shelter across the street, she had watched 2 men step out of the cars, one opening the door while the other stood exactly 1 pace behind. She turned to the second page, then the third, then the final page, the one with only a few lines and a single surname, repeated 3 times. Her hands began to tremble, not because she was afraid, because only one sentence echoed through her mind, the very sentence she had spoken to him at the front desk that night, after listening to his explanation about the transportation company and the 2 kind coworkers who had driven him back. She had seen every part of his story that didn't fit. She had been clear-headed enough to ask 3 more questions. Questions he wouldn't have been able to answer. But she hadn't asked them. She had nodded, and she had said those words to him. "All right, I believe you." The bus rolled up and pulled away again. Maren remained on the bench, the envelope open across her lap, and for the first time in 2 years, she missed her bus. At 2:15 on Sunday morning, the lobby of the Alderfield Hotel was completely deserted. Elias was standing behind the front desk when he heard the side door open. Maren walked in. She wasn't wearing her restaurant uniform. She wasn't scheduled to work that day. In her hands was a neatly folded coat, and beneath it was a brown envelope. She walked straight to the desk and placed the envelope on the wooden counter. He looked at it. He didn't need to open it. "Who gave it to you? You're not going to deny anything?" Elias was silent for a moment. Then he stepped out from behind the desk, walked around it, and stood facing her in the middle of the lobby. "No." Maren nodded, as though she had known what his answer would be, and had still hoped she was wrong. "So everything was a lie?" "My name was a lie," he said. "What I told you wasn't. Don't play with words. I'm not." She drew in a breath. "What's your name?" "Elias Marchetti." "Who owns this hotel?" "My mother." "And the desk you've been standing behind? That belongs to my mother too. Then what were you doing down here?" He didn't answer immediately, and that silence had already answered for him. "You came down here to see how people treat one another when they think they're standing in front of some front desk clerk, didn't you?" Elias said nothing. "I understand now." Maren lowered her eyes to the coat in her hands. "So, where do I fit into all of this? Was I the answer, or was I part of the test?" "Maren, answer me." "At first, you were part of the test," he said. "After the night you gave me that lunchbox, you weren't anymore." She laughed, a short, weary sound. "Do you know what I lost that night? I went without food from 10 o'clock that night until 4 in the morning. By the time I got home, there was no food left, so I drank a glass of water and went to bed. At 6, I got up and went back to work. I'm not telling you this because I want your pity. I'm telling you because you just said that was the night you stopped testing me." Elias stood motionless. "You wear this uniform the way people wear a costume," she said, and her voice remained calm, which was the most painful part of all. 3 months. And then you take it off and go back to the 40th floor. I wear it to survive. I've worn it for 7 years. I even wore it the day my mother was rushed to the emergency room. I know, you know. She repeated those 2 words. You knew, and you still let me believe you stood on your feet for 8 hours because you needed the money just as much as I did. Elias didn't offer a single word in his own defense. He could have told her that the nights he stood behind that desk were the most honest nights he had lived in years. He could have told her that he had summoned Booker back with a phone call at 11 o'clock on the night she was detained, that he had given an order which forced his family's entire operation to work for 8 straight hours, that only a few hours later he had made another call, and that call had changed the entire future of her mother's life. He could have told her everything. He didn't say a word. That night when I was sitting in the holding room, Maren continued, you came in and sat with me. You held my hand. You told me that even if the whole city turned its back on me, you would still be there beside me. I meant every word. I know you did. That's what makes this so hard. She lifted her head, and for the first time during the entire conversation, her eyes began to redden. Do you know what I've been thinking about these past few days? I haven't been thinking about your money. I haven't been thinking about your family name either. I've been thinking about that rainy night, when you drove me home, when you told me that people only ask to die when they believe they're slowly killing the person they love. You said it as though you had been thinking about it your entire life. And I believed you. I truly believed you, Elias. She spoke his real name for the first time, and for the last time that night. Then I opened that envelope. The lobby was silent. Listen to me. Maren straightened her back. My mother has 2 weeks left before the hospital releases her reserved place. My younger sister has dropped out of school for the 3rd time. Last week, I was handcuffed in front of 30 people I had worked beside for years, and not one of them opened their mouth to defend me. She went on, and her voice began to tremble, but she didn't stop. I don't have any strength left, not even a little. I don't have enough strength to love a man when every time he walks out the door, I don't know whether he'll come back. Elias still said nothing. Say it. She looked at him. Tell me you'll leave all of it behind. Tell me that tomorrow you'll walk away from that life, that what happened at the port will never happen again. Say it. Say one sentence, and I'll stay." He looked at her for a long time, and he said nothing. Because of all the things he could lie to her about, that was the one thing he couldn't. Marin nodded. She lifted the coat, held it in her hands for one more second, then placed it on the front desk beside the brown envelope. She smoothed it carefully, the way someone returns something borrowed from another person. "Thank you for that rainy night." Then she turned and walked toward the side door. She didn't run. She didn't look back as she always had before. The heavy door closed behind her, and the lobby of the Alderfield Hotel fell completely silent. Elias Marchetti remained alone in the middle of the lobby. For 33 years, everything in his life had begun with a sentence he spoke and ended with someone else obeying. He could shut down a port in 7 days. He could recover a recording that an entire technical department had declared lost. With one phone call, he could stretch the final 3 weeks of a 56-year-old woman's life into all the years she still had left to live. Yet now, as the only person he wanted to keep was walking out the door, he stood there with no one he could command. At 6 o'clock in the morning, Elias came home. Rosalind was already awake, sitting at the dining table with a cup of tea, just as she had every morning for the past 25 years. She watched her son walk in, saw the coat draped over his arm, and set down her cup. "You haven't slept." "No." "What happened?" Elias pulled out a chair and sat down. He didn't speak right away. Rosalind waited. She had learned long ago that her son never spoke until he had finished the sentence in his mind. "Do you remember the file you gave me on Sunday? The 7 names?" "Yes." He placed both hands on the table. "I found the woman I want to marry, and I've just lost her." Rosalind didn't ask who she was. She didn't ask why. She simply looked at her son for a very long time, and on his face, she saw something she hadn't seen since he was 8 years old. "She knows who you are?" Someone gave her a file. "What did you say to her?" "She told me that if I said one sentence, she would stay." "What sentence?" "She asked me to say that tomorrow I would walk away from all of this." Rosalind raised a hand and slowly turned the teacup on its saucer. "And you couldn't say it. I couldn't lie to her anymore." She nodded slowly. Then she stood, walked around the table, and stopped behind her son's chair, in the same place where she had stood that Sunday morning. "Elias." "Yes. Do you remember the night I came home soaked from the rain and knelt in front of you at the foot of the stairs?" "I remember. What did I tell you?" He didn't need to think. "From this night forward, you mustn't cry in front of anyone. Tears are the only thing another person can take from you without asking permission." "That's right." Rosalind rested a hand on her son's shoulder. Her hand had aged greatly, but it was still as cold as it had been 25 years earlier. "I said that because I had just lost my husband that night, and I didn't know how to teach you to survive in this house. I taught you to keep everything inside. And you learned too well, my son. So well that now a woman can stand in front of you and ask for just one sentence, and you still can't open your mouth to say it." Her fingers tightened gently around his shoulder. "I'm sorry I ever said those words to you." Elias didn't turn around. "But I'm going to tell you one more thing, and this time, listen carefully." She leaned down and spoke beside his ear, her voice perfectly calm. "She isn't afraid of you. She's afraid of the world you'll make her enter. So clean it up." Then Rosalind lifted her hand, walked out of the dining room, and left her son sitting there beside a cup of tea that had gone cold. At 9 o'clock that morning, Elias went up to the 40th floor. He didn't sleep. He called Booker and ordered him to bring 3 things. The first was the complete system access log for every camera at the Alderfield Hotel during the 7 days before the money disappeared. The second was every transaction involving Sloan Whitmore's personal account over the previous 6 months. The third was a list of the 7 people who had known the schedule of the shipment intercepted at the North Harbor. He worked through that entire day and into the following night. The order to erase the footage had been issued through the account of a technician who no longer worked there, but the computer that sent the command was inside the building, on the floor where the board's offices were located. Sloan's account had received a payment from a consulting company in Indiana. That company had no employees, and only one registered representative. Elias searched the representative's name. Then he opened the third file, the list of 7 people, and worked his way down from the top. The name of the consulting company's representative wasn't among those 7 people. But the man who had signed the papers establishing that company 11 years earlier was Elias sat motionless for a very long time. He stared at the name on the screen, the name of the man who had stood beside his father since before Elias was born. The only man in the windowless room who was permitted to sit when Elias sat. He remembered the meeting several months earlier, the day he had spoken those 3 words, "Close the port," and the gaze that had lingered 1 second too long, the gaze he had dismissed. Outside the windows, daylight slowly began to rise. Booker had been waiting by the door for so long that Elias no longer knew when he had arrived. "Sir." Elias didn't take his eyes off the screen. He spoke exactly 4 words. "Summon all the families." At 4 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon, the Doyle sisters arrived at the hospital. That morning, the hospital had called Marin and told her that her mother's financial paperwork had been completed and that the transplant would be scheduled for the following week. Marin asked them to repeat it 3 times. The person in the finance office only said that a foundation had paid the full amount and that she shouldn't worry, because they would take care of everything else. She sat beside her mother's bed for 2 straight hours without managing to say a single coherent sentence. At 4 o'clock, she told Bridget to stay at the desk and finish signing the paperwork while she went ahead, so she wouldn't be late for her afternoon shift. Bridget was standing at the payment desk with the papers in her hands when, through the large glass windows in the lobby, she saw her sister step onto the sidewalk. A dark car pulled up and stopped directly in front of Marin. 2 men got out and said something very brief to her. The car door closed, and the vehicle drove away. Bridget stood frozen at the desk. By the time she ran to the door, the street was empty. She stood there, still clutching the entire stack of papers, then pulled out her phone. She meant to call emergency services. Her finger stopped, not because she had thought of anything clever, but because she was 19 years old and so frightened that she couldn't remember what she was supposed to say to the dispatcher. She scrolled through her contacts, searching desperately for any name at all, and then she saw the 3 words she herself had asked her sister to save months earlier, on the day she had wanted to thank the man who had kept her wallet safe. Eli. Front desk. She called. The first ring hadn't even finished. "Bridget. Eli." She spoke, and her voice broke on the very first word. "My sister." There was a car, and there were 2 men. They stopped right outside the hospital, and then my sister got into the car, and they drove away. I've been calling her, but she won't answer. I don't know what to do. On the other end of the line, there was no sharp intake of breath, no question asking her to repeat herself, no startled response. Elias asked only 3 things, 1 sentence at a time, and the way he asked them made Bridget answer without thinking. "Where are you standing?" "At the hospital's main entrance, by the lobby." "Which direction did the car go?" Toward my right, out to the main road." "Was it a dark 4-door car with no front license plate?" "Yes." 3 seconds of silence passed. Then his voice returned, still quiet, still even, exactly like the voice of a man reading out a train schedule. "Bridget, listen to me. Stay exactly where you are. Don't go anywhere. Don't step outside onto the sidewalk. All right. Don't call the police. But Eli, listen to me," he said. "If you call the police, your sister will be in greater danger. I can't explain it right now, but trust me just this once." Bridget gripped the phone tightly. "All right. Someone will be there to pick you up in 4 minutes. His name is Booker. He's tall, with gray hair at his temples. He'll take you somewhere safe and stay with you until I call again." "What about my sister?" "I'll bring her back. Promise me." There was a very brief silence. "I don't make promises I can't keep." Then he continued, and Bridget remembered what he said for the rest of her life. "But write down the time. 4:11. Before midnight tonight, your sister will be sitting beside you." The call ended. Exactly 3 minutes and 40 seconds later, a car stopped outside the hospital. The man who stepped out looked exactly as Elias had described him, tall, with gray hair at his temples. He walked straight toward her, and the first thing he did was remove his coat and give it to her because she was trembling. "Miss Doyle, I'm Booker Hayes. Let's go." On the 40th floor, Elias set his phone on the desk. He didn't rise immediately. He remained motionless for about 5 seconds, both hands resting on the desktop, his fingers still, his posture unchanged, exactly as he always sat in the windowless room while listening to reports. Then he reached out and pressed the intercom. "Call everyone who's currently in the building. 10 minutes. He pressed the second button. "Cut off every stream of Arturo Falco's money. 3 accounts in Indiana, 2 transportation companies registered in his brother-in-law's name, and the credit fund on the south side, in which we've held a 40% stake since last year. You have 6 hours. He pressed the third button. Prepare the car. Only after his hand left the final intercom button did Elias Marchetti allow himself to close his eyes once, very briefly, before opening them again. Beyond the glass windows, the city was still living through 4:13 in the afternoon on an ordinary Wednesday. 6 hours later, at 10:15 that night, Arturo Falco knew he had lost everything. The first call came at 7 o'clock from the bank in Indiana, informing him that 3 accounts had been frozen at the request of the controlling shareholder. The second came at 8 o'clock from his brother-in-law, who said that 2 transportation companies had lost their operating licenses because problems had been discovered in incorporation documents filed 10 years earlier. The third came at 9:20 from the credit fund on the south side that Falco had always believed belonged to him. The caller said only that the board had just met, and Falco no longer had withdrawal authority. By 10 o'clock, Falco's phone had stopped ringing altogether. That was what sent a chill down his spine. At 10:30, a single black vehicle stopped outside the warehouse. Elias Marchetti stepped out into the cold night air alone, his tailored coat unbuttoned, his silhouette cut sharply against the dim streetlights. He carried no weapon, only a single folded sheet of paper in his hand. As he crossed the yard, the 2 armed guards at the entrance instinctively backed away, their hands freezing on their holsters, paralyzed by the sheer lethal aura of the man walking toward them. Inside, 8 men stood around Arturo Falco. The atmosphere in the room plummeted to sub-zero the moment Elias crossed the threshold. Elias didn't offer a greeting, nor did he look at any of the armed men. He stepped up to the center table, his icy gaze locking onto Falco, commanding total silence without speaking a single word. He unfolded the paper and began to read. He read the account numbers of the 3 accounts in Indiana and the name of the person who had signed the authorization for each one. He read the names of the 2 transportation companies, the dates their licenses had been issued, and the date they had been revoked, that very afternoon. He read the name of the credit fund on the south side, the 40% ownership stake, and the date those shares had been purchased, 1 year and 7 months earlier. Falco sat motionless. Then Elias read 3 more names. Those names weren't on the list of accounts. They belonged to 3 men standing in that very room, one behind Falco and the other 2 on either side of the door. Beside each name, Elias read a number, and that number was the number of months each man had been receiving money from the Marchetti family. 36, 31, 29. He folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket. No one in the warehouse moved. Falco slowly raised his eyes toward the man standing behind him. "Mr. Falco," Elias said, his voice so quiet that the men at the far end of the room had to hold their breath to hear him. "I didn't come here to threaten you. A threat requires something that hasn't happened yet. Everything I just read has already happened." He took 1 step forward. "I came to let you know that I've been inside your house for 3 years. Falco shot to his feet. He said something very quickly, but before his men could react, the heavy iron doors were pushed open. Booker Hayes stepped inside with 6 armed guards, instantly disarming Falco's men in total silence. Within seconds, the outer room was fully secured. In the small room at the back, Marin couldn't see anything. She had been sitting there since that afternoon, with the door locked from the outside. No one had come in, and no one had spoken a word to her except when someone brought her a bottle of water at dusk. She could only listen. She heard footsteps running across the concrete floor. She heard a chair fall. She heard 2 heavy blows, then the crash of a metal door slamming shut somewhere far away. Then everything went silent. That silence lasted about a minute, and it felt longer than everything that had come before it. Then she heard footsteps. Only one person. Slow, steady, unhurried. The bolt slid back. The door opened. Elias stood in the doorway. He wore a black suit. He wasn't breathing hard. Behind him, in the light spilling in from the main warehouse, 2 men stepped back and bowed their heads. This was the first time Marin had ever seen him like this. Not in the charcoal gray uniform. Not as the man who stood behind the front desk for 8 hours and once dropped an entire cup of coffee brewed far too strong. This was the man in the photograph on the first page of the brown envelope. The man who sat at the head of the table, while no one else was permitted to sit beside him. She rose from the chair. She didn't step back. She looked directly at him and held her ground. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." "Did anyone touch you?" "No." Elias nodded once. He stepped inside, removed his suit jacket, and draped it over her shoulders. Bridget is waiting for you. I'm taking you home." She allowed him to place the jacket around her shoulders. She said nothing. As they crossed the main warehouse, she looked straight ahead and didn't turn her head to either side because he had angled his body slightly to shield her view, so naturally that it seemed like the only thing anyone would have done. Near the door, Falco called out from behind them. His voice had gone hoarse. "Marchetti." Elias stopped but didn't turn around. "I wasn't the one who found the girl," Falco said. "Someone told me where she was." "I know." "You know?" "Since this afternoon," Elias said. "But I still wanted to hear you say that name here, in front of the 8 men in this room." A silence followed. Then Falco spat out a single word. "Lomax." Those 2 syllables fell onto the warehouse floor and lay there without a sound. Elias showed no reaction. He merely reached for Marin's elbow and guided her toward the door. When they stepped into the yard, she looked up at him and asked only one question. "Who is that man?" "The man who has stood beside my father since before I was born." 3 days later, the families of the city were summoned. It wasn't a private meeting, and it wasn't 2 men sitting together in a warehouse. This time, everyone was there. 9 names, 9 heads of families, seated around a long table in a room beneath a building on Wacker Street. It had been 11 years since the city had seen a meeting like this one. Curtis Lomax was brought in last. He was still impeccably dressed, every button of his jacket fastened, and he was invited to sit in the chair directly to Elias's right, the same chair he had occupied for 26 years. Elias allowed him to sit. Then he placed 3 files on the table. The first contained copies of the incorporation documents for a consulting company in Indiana, signed 11 years earlier, with Lomax's signature on the final page. The second contained statements showing the payments transferred from that company over the previous 6 months, including one payment sent to the personal account of an Alderfield hotel employee and another sent to an account on the south side. The third contained the original 6-month schedules for 3 Marchetti shipping routes, clearly marked with the date each copy had been printed and the name of the person to whom it had been issued. Elias opened the third file, turned it so that everyone at the table could see, and said nothing. He simply left the file lying in the center of the table for 10 agonizing seconds. The heavy silence in the subterranean room was absolute. No head of any family dared to breathe loudly. Elias slowly raised his eyes, sweeping his cold, unreadable gaze across the 9 leaders. "I didn't invite you here to ask for your counsel," Elias said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper that sent a shiver through the entire room. "I invited you to witness what happens when someone forgets who rules this city." He turned his head slowly toward his right. "Mr. Lomax." The 47-year-old veteran remained motionless, cold sweat breaking across his forehead. "You spent 26 years coveting my father's chair." Elias continued softly, his words carrying the weight of an executioner's blade. "Starting today, your name is erased from this city. You will have no chair, no empire, and no shadow to hide in." Lomax wasn't taken away. He was allowed to stand and walk out of the room on his own 2 feet. That was the only thing he had left. Over the next 7 days, everything bearing the name Curtis Lomax closed, 1 piece at a time. 3 accounts held in his name were seized under the internal agreement. All 9 families had signed at that table that day. His house on the north side was transferred to a foundation. Every door he had once been able to knock on during those 26 years, from restaurants in Little Italy to law offices on LaSalle Street, received the same brief message, that this man was no longer connected to anyone. No one touched him. No one needed to. They simply allowed him to walk through the very city he had once held half of in his hands, while not a single door opened for him again. Lomax was allowed to live. That was the punishment. That same morning, at the Alderfield Hotel, Rosalind Marchetti summoned the entire staff to the main lobby. 300 people. The board of directors stood in a line behind her. On the large screen erected in the center of the lobby, the security footage from the 14th floor hallway was played from the beginning. Not the edited version, but the complete recording, including the 30 seconds beforehand at the western end of the corridor, where a woman removed her long coat, folded it, and stepped into the executive elevator. The entire lobby fell silent. Rosalind held the microphone. 3 weeks ago, 30 people stood in the basement of this building and watched one of our employees being placed in handcuffs, she said. Today, I asked all 300 of you to come down here because I want the number of people who know she was innocent to be greater than the number who saw her arrested. She motioned to the screen, where the video showed Sloane using a stolen manager's master key to unlock Marin's locker. She turned. "Miss Whitmore." Sloane stepped forward. She didn't deny it. Perhaps because she had been given 3 days to understand that there was nothing left for her to deny. "Your employment is terminated as of this moment. The police are waiting outside the lobby." Sloane stood there before 300 people, beneath the footage that was still playing on the screen behind her. Someone below called out a question, their voice trembling with anger. "Why, Marin? What did that girl ever do to you?" Sloane turned toward the voice. She remained silent for a long time. Then she answered, so softly that those standing farther away could only hear through the murmured repetition of the people beside them. "I didn't hurt her because I hated her," she said. "I hurt her because I thought she was nothing." Colleen Doyle's transplant took place on Monday morning and lasted 6 hours. By that afternoon, she was awake. 3 days later, Marin went down to the finance office to finish the paperwork. She sat there with the file resting on her lap, waiting for someone to add up the remaining charges, and she had already calculated in her mind how much money she would have to find. The employee typed for a while, then looked up. "Miss Doyle, there's no outstanding balance on your account. Could you check again, please? There's still the cost of the anti-rejection medication for the first 6 months. That's already been paid. What about the intensive care unit? That's been paid too." He turned the screen toward her. "All of Mrs. Colleen Doyle's treatment expenses, transplant costs, and post-transplant follow-up care have been paid in full by a charitable foundation. The payment was made in one lump sum, not in installments." "When?" "Give me a moment." He scrolled down and found the note. "Here it is. The money reached the hospital's account close to midnight, about a month ago." He read the date aloud. Marin sat motionless. "Miss Doyle, could you read that date again for me?" He read it again, and Marin remained there, her fingers gripping the edge of the file, because she knew exactly what day it was. It was the night she had sat in the holding room beneath the Alderfield Hotel. It was before the night she laid the jacket on the front desk and walked out through the side entrance. Before the day she resigned from the Alderfield. Before the day she left him. She thanked the employee, picked up the file, walked into the hallway, and stood there for a very long time. Then she went to find him. She didn't have to go far. Elias was standing at the end of the 3rd-floor hallway, beside the window overlooking the parking lot. There was no black car in the courtyard below. No one stood 3 paces behind him. He was there alone, his hands empty, like an ordinary man who had come to the hospital to visit someone. She walked up and stopped in front of him. "You paid before I left you." Elias didn't answer immediately. "The night I was sitting in that holding room, you walked out and called someone about the footage. Then you made another call." "Yes. Why didn't you tell me?" "When was I supposed to tell you?" "When I was standing in the lobby," she said. "When I gave your jacket back. When I told you that if you said one sentence, I would stay. All you had to do was tell me you'd paid for my mother's treatment. Just one sentence, Elias. I wouldn't have been able to leave." "I know. Then why?" "Because that was the very reason you wouldn't have been able to leave," he said. "And I didn't want you to stay because you owed me. I've spent 33 years surrounded by people who remained beside me because they owed me something. I didn't want one more person like that, especially not you." He looked directly into her eyes. "I didn't pay to keep you." Marin stood there, still holding the file against her chest. "Do you know what frightened me most?" she said. "It wasn't the warehouse. It wasn't the 2 men outside the hospital. It was sitting in that room with the door locked from the outside, and thinking that if I didn't make it home that night, Bridget would be sitting alone in the apartment, and my mother would wake after her surgery, with no one beside her. That was what frightened me. I was afraid of leaving those 2 alone. You don't have to be afraid anymore. Promise me one thing. I don't make promises I can't keep." "I know," she said. "Then promise me something you can keep." Elias was silent for several seconds. Then he reached out, took the file from her hands, placed it on the windowsill, and held both of her hands in his. "You'll never have to be afraid alone again." And Marin cried. This time, it wasn't in a car, and she wasn't collapsed over a table in a basement room. This time, she stood upright and wept, her hands still resting in his, and she didn't wipe the tears away. It was the 3rd time in this entire story, and it was the last. "There's something else," Elias said after she had composed herself. "I'm walking away from it." She looked up. "It won't happen quickly. Some things can't be severed with a single cut. And I won't lie to you and say I'll wake up tomorrow as a different man. It'll take a few years. He continued, his voice still quiet, but I'm doing it. At 2 o'clock on Saturday morning, the Alderfield Hotel lobby was empty, except for the steady hum of the air conditioning and the yellow light spilling across the stone floor, exactly as it had been on that first night. Marin entered through the side door. She no longer worked there, but the doorman still nodded in greeting. She walked to the front desk. Elias was standing behind it. He wasn't wearing the charcoal gray uniform. He watched her approach, and when she stopped in front of him, he reached out and placed an employee meal box on the counter. The lid was still fastened shut. Then he set a ring beside it. "The night shift is long," he said. "I want to spend the rest of it with you." Marin looked at the two things on the counter. She raised a hand to cover her mouth, smiled, and tears began to fall again. But this time she didn't count them as another moment of crying, because some tears don't belong to the same kind as the ones that came before. She pushed the meal box toward him, exactly as she had the first time, and answered with the same words she had spoken that night. "Eat first, then you can go back to standing." The wedding took place on an autumn morning in the courtyard of a small church on the southwest side, just a few blocks from the two-room apartment where the Doyle sisters had once lived. There was no press. There was no long guest list. Rosalind Marchetti had wanted to hold the wedding somewhere larger, but Marin asked her to let them have it here, and Rosalind agreed as soon as she heard the reason. This was the church Marin's mother had attended every Sunday for 20 years, even during the years when she had needed a cane to make the journey. Colleen Doyle had recovered from the transplant. She still had to attend regular checkups and take her medication faithfully. But that morning, she rose on her own, steadied herself with her cane, and walked her daughter down the aisle. Halfway there, she paused for a moment to catch her breath. No one hurried her. The entire church waited, and then she continued. Bridget walked behind her sister. She had returned to school at the beginning of the semester, and in her coat pocket she still carried the student identification card she had put away 3 separate times. In the front row, Rosalind rose when they reached her. She took Marin's hand, removed an old ring from her own finger, the ring her mother-in-law had given her more than 30 years earlier, and slipped it onto the hand of her new daughter-in-law. She didn't say anything. She simply held that hand for one more second, then let it go. At the far end of the row, Booker Hayes stood leaning against a stone pillar, dressed in a black coat as always. But that morning, for the first time in 15 years, there was nothing inside his coat. Elias waited on the church steps. He watched Marin walk toward him, and when she reached him, he said nothing until the priest asked the question. Then he answered, his voice as quiet as ever, so quiet that the people in the last row had to tilt their heads to hear him clearly. But this time, no one in that church courtyard was silent because they were afraid. They were silent because they were waiting to listen. Some stories end there, and this one does too. But there are a few things we would like to leave with you. People reveal their true nature only when they stand before someone they believe is incapable of fighting back. The way we speak to a server, to the person collecting our trash, to the person standing behind a counter at 2 o'clock in the morning, that is our true portrait, not the way we behave in front of someone with power. And true kindness needs no conditions, and no audience. Marin Doyle didn't offer that meal box because she expected anything in return. She gave away the only food she had for 8 hours to a stranger, then turned and walked away without waiting for a word of thanks. There are people in this world who are poor in money, yet so rich that they can give away the very thing they themselves lack. That is a kind of wealth no one can ever steal, and it is the only kind that follows us to the end of the road. If today's story touched your heart, please leave a like and share it with someone you believe deserves to be treated with kindness. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that every day we can listen together to more meaningful stories. How do you feel about the story of Marin and Elias? Whom did you care for most in this story? And was there anything in it that reminded you of something from your own life? We would be deeply grateful to read the words you share from your heart in the comments below. We wish everyone listening to this video lasting health, a joyful life, and peace and serenity each day beside the people you love. Goodbye for now, and we look forward to seeing you again in the next video.